Hello, good evening, and welcome to Prog Chattery 777. We are talking about Rush, and we've made it to their second album, a significant moment. This is Fly By Night, released in 1975. It is, of course, significant because it's the first album to feature Neil Peart on the drums, and so it is, in essence, the first album by Rush as we know them. And it's a really, really good little album. Obviously, when Neil Peart joined the band, he completely changed the band. It became a different thing. It brought them to a different level. Musically, what he brings to the table as a drummer is this very orchestral style of playing. It's still very, hard-hitting, heavy rock drumming, but he orchestrates what Geddy and Alex are doing. And not only does that make the drums sound really, really cool, but it also, emphasizes Geddy and Alex's parts. So, their chops are much more obvious with Peart's drumming. The chops had always been there. You listen to the first album, and there's some phenomenal playing by all three of them. But with John Rutsey being more of a straight-ahead rock drummer, he doesn't emphasize what Geddy and Alex are doing quite the same way that Peart does. So all of a sudden, it's much more obvious that well, holy shit, these guys are immensely talented musicians, and it becomes much more obvious. But Peart is a fantastic drummer. I mean, I've always thought he might be a little bit stiff. I've preferred jazzier guys like Phil Collins and Bill Bruford and guys like that. And, but that's not to take away anything that Peart does. He is in essence a straight ahead rock drummer, and as a rock drummer, he's one of the most influential and one of the greatest rock drummers there are. You cannot knock the guy, and especially for this time. I think in 1975, no drummer sounded quite like Neil Peart. That precise style, like I said, that orchestrational style that still rocked is. It's quite something, and hugely influential, like I said. And Peart also contributed the lyrics as well. For the most part, at this time, he contributes the lyrics. There's a couple of songs on here where Geddy Lee wrote the lyrics, and there's in this early stage, Lee wrote a few songs, but eventually they kind of settled into a songwriting method where Geddy and Alex would write all the music, like the melodies and the chords and all that, and as well as the instrumental passages, and Peart would write the lyrics, and that was kind of their happy songwriting method. I always thought that Peart probably, should have deserved a musical credit because, on this album and all of the Rush albums, you can tell he obviously puts a lot of time and effort into arranging those drum parts, and for example, if you're a cover band and you're gonna, attempt to cover Rush, if you're the drummer, you better well get those fills down exactly as it is, because his drumming arrangements are so integral to the arrangements of the song. So I've always felt that he probably deserved a writing credit for the music, but obviously they're fine with it because that was kind of the way that they did it for years to come. But on this album, it's not all like that. There's a few tracks that are, the music is written exclusively by Geddy Lee and exclusively by Alex Lifeson, and like I said, Lee wrote a few of the lyrics as well. But and in general on this album, the songs that are written by all three of them tend to be the best, which is not surprising. But yeah, stylistically, the album. It's kind of a transitional album, really. There's still a lot of those blues-based hard rock type songs that made up the first album. That style is still very present on a lot of the songs on here. But there's also lots of great hints as to what's to come. This, of course, has a very significant moment on it with By-tor and the Snow Dog. That's the first long sort of epic that Rush had put together. And it is a great one. We'll talk more about that as I go through the tracks. But you can tell that they're leaning towards that progressive rock thing. I think that was a thing with John Rutsey and Lee and Lifeson as well. As I think when they were doing their thing with the first Rush album, those early years, I think Lee and Lifeson were starting to get more into bands like Genesis and Yes and King Crimson, and Rutsey, was still the Zeppelin hard rock kind of a guy. And with Peart, he also, he was listening to all the progressive stuff from England as well. So they had they all had that common goal to kind of, or those common aspirations to write those kinds of songs. And, it's not a full-blown prog album. Like I said, there's a lot of straight-ahead rock on here as well. Um, but it's a very interesting historical point because you can see where the band is headed, and you can see where they're trying to go. That said, like the bluesier, the hard rock blues kind of songs that are on here sound a lot different to the ones that are on the first album, and that is entirely due to Peart's drumming and the way that it's all arranged, and it's all quite good. So, yeah, well, before I talk about the tracks, I should mention Peart's lyrics. Obviously, they are miles away from the lyrics that are on the first album. Of course, it's the first album's got songs like "In the Mood," which is about girls, which is not a Rush thing at all. And what Peart is able to bring to the table on a lyrical scale is the literary influence. He's obviously a very, very fond lover of books and whatnot, and he uses that as his inspiration. So there's a lot of philosophical things on here. As I mentioned before, By-tor and the Snow Dog, we get some of the fantasy themes that would become more and more prevalent as they went along in the next couple of albums. But obviously that's a very, very big change, and it's a unique thing too, because Rush is always a heavy rock band. That's essentially what they are, and Geddy Lee is a rock and roll vocalist. It's that wailing, high pitched rock and roll style, and it's a unique thing with Rush, particularly in these early years where they're singing about fantasy and whatnot, and Lee is just belting it out there like a rock and roll star. It's one of those things that make Rush very unique, and it's what makes him proggy, I guess. And yeah, Peart is a great lyricist because he's not my favorite lyricist. He can be I don't want to say simple, but what makes Peart a great lyricist is his ability to take sort of intellectual type concepts and ideas, and he makes it accessible. His lyrics never really feel super pretentious to me. There's an accessibility to it. It doesn't seem highbrow, even though it's sort of intellectual. I think that there's a great skill to that. However, there is a certain naivety to some of his lyrics too. I think I don't want to say simple, but particularly in these albums. But again, this is an album by a band of young men, so naturally that's just a part of growing up and maturing as songwriters and all the rest of it. Blah blah blah. Anyway, let's discuss the tracks then. So, side one opens with Anthem, and this is the first real Rush classic for me. I mean, I guess aside from Working Man, but Working Man is certainly a classic, but Anthem is a fantastic song. It is sort of in that blues, the hard rock blues kind of a thing. But the most significant thing is right off the bat we get to hear Neil Peart, and he shows the band off beautifully at that beginning, at that opening sequence. Right away, those chops are there, and they're putting them on display, and it's not necessarily just like a show-off fest, because it rocks too. It's got that it's repetitive enough and catchy enough that you can really get into it, and it's really, really cool. And it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more to it than some of the stuff on the first album. Like I said, it is that hard rock blues thing, but it has the intro, and then there's it kind of goes through a few different sections. Kind of got the start-stop thing, and it's a really, really good rollicking number. One of, like I said, a Rush classic and a contender for one of the best on the album. We also get Neil Peart's lyrics. The first song that was inspired by Ayn Rand, who wrote some stuff. I'm not really an expert by any means, but it's all about the individual and marching forth, and it's a philosophical sort of a thing. But yeah, it's a great set of lyrics, and yeah, Anthem is a great song. One of my favorite Rush songs. I can honestly say that that early on. Track 2 of side 1 is Best I Can. This is much more typical of the first album. Again, we get Peart's drumming, cool drumming arrangements. Not quite as extreme as the stuff on Anthem, like some of the fills. Back to Best I Can. But yeah, the second track is certainly more typical of the first album. The drumming is certainly up a notch, and that it's more well arranged and it's more thought out. But it's a pretty average song, probably the least interesting on the album. Um, Written entirely by Geddy Lee, lyrics and music. Then we get to track 3, Beneath, Between, and Behind. Now this is another song that's typical of the first album, but I really, really like it, actually. I think I like it more than anything that's on the first album, except maybe Working Man. But this one, the music is all written by Alex Lifeson with Peart's lyrics. And yeah, you get that bluesy, Zeppelin vibe, but it's a great song. And again, there's some more interesting arrangements. Like it goes like halftime for the bridge towards the middle, so you can see them kind of experimenting with some of those more jarring starts and stops and whatnot, which is kind of cool. Definitely a good song. Side 1 wraps up with track 4, By-tor and the Snow Dog. This is certainly the album's centerpiece. It is the first time that they, blatantly set out to do the prog thing. You can tell they've been listening to a lot of Yes. This was released the same year as Relayer, and it's interesting. Like with By-tor and the Snow Dog, of course, it's a fantasy tale. It tells the story of Prince By-tor and his battle with the Snow Dog, which one wonderful, nerdy sort of fantasy lyrics. I say that term with all due respect, of course. But it's similar to Yes or Gates of Beryllium by Yes, where they have that battle sequence in there. There's a battle sequence in By-tor as well, which is really, really cool. And yeah, what a great song. It's very much in that hard rock sort of vein. The intro is very, very high energy. I don't want to say it's punk, but it's definitely rock and roll with these crazy fantasy lyrics. And yeah, that middle section is just fantastic, and it's got the battle sequence. We got Geddy Lee goes into that really, really cool bass line, and Lifeson does the whole battle sequence on his guitar. It sounds really, really good. Again, you can hear that Yes influence, but I think I probably like Rush more than Yes. Yes were more original, I'll give them that. But the thing with Rush is that they do the Yes thing, but it rocks a lot. It rocks a bit harder. It's more, it's closer to hard rock, and the lyrics are generally better, I think. Personal opinion. But yeah, there's lots of great sections in By-tor. I really like there's the crazy section towards the end. That's really, really cool, and it all winds itself back up to the main theme, like the rocking theme. And yeah, I mean their first attempt at doing that sort of real proggy thing is a really, really good one. I think obviously the next album, Caress of Steel, they went even further into the prog thing. But I think By-tor really is an early classic, and it's great because it's just the band playing. It's just the three-piece. Geddy wasn't in synthesizer mode yet by any means. So yeah, it really is a great, great early classic. They've brought it back a couple of times, I think, and in later years, which is pretty cool. But yeah, it's like I said, it's the first time that they really took that display of chops seriously, and they said, okay, let's make a song with this big long instrumental section in the middle that describes a battle, and it's fantastic. Highlight of the album, best song on the album, no question about it. Then we flip the record over, of course, and we get side 2, which things changed quite a bit on side 2, actually. This is another kind of indicator of where they were going. The first song is really the pop song of the album. It's actually significantly lighter than anything on the first album, I would say. The title track, Fly By Night, it might be a contender. It's a contender for my least favorite song on the album, just because I've heard it so many times. It's the big hit. It's on the radio all the time. You hear it. And it's all right. It's not. It's by no means a bad song. Lyrically, it talks about Peart's travels as a young musician. He went to before he joined Rush. He went off to England as a young man in hopes of blossoming a music career, and didn't work out in England. So he came back to Canada and joined Rush. So then it worked out. But it's a cool young traveler's song, I guess. But it's like I said, it's not my favorite on the album, and it's very much the pop song. They were doing the pop thing at this point. But we get to track 2 of side 2, track 6 overall. We get "Making Memories," and this is where we start to hear a nice sort of tonal change. It's the acoustic rock song, really. It's kind of the rocking folk song that I mentioned in the previous album with Rush. It probably rocks harder than any Zeppelin album because it doesn't have the ballad or the folk song. Well, "Making Memories" is the Zeppelin-esque folk song. Still, I guess fair to say it's that Zeppelin influence is really there, but it's nice to hear that tonal shift, and they're starting to experiment with different sounds, and doing the acoustic thing is it's cool. It shows that they want to get that diversity. They're aiming for that diversity, and it's a cool little song. I'm a fan of it, I must say. Then we get to track 3 of side 2, "Rivendell." Literary influences are back. This time, of course, Peart is making reference to the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit books. And this might be one of the lightest songs that Rush ever did, actually. It's just a very plain acoustic ballad, very calm, gentle vocals by Geddy Lee. Again, the Yes influence is certainly there. And it's by no means like the best thing they ever did. It's not the best on the album or anything, but it's really nice to hear something with that much of a contrast. It's a rare moment of Rush being very delicate and very placid, which is they're describing Rivendell from The Hobbit. It's a wonderful paradise sort of place. And the fantasy lyrics are very prevalent, which is cool, and very proggy, and it's not a prog epic by any means, but it helps give the album that proggy kind of vibe. Good track. And then the whole thing winds up with "In the End," which is again closer in spirit to the first album, but again we get that great contrast. It has that the acoustic opening is very quiet and relaxed and nice, and then it winds its way up to the big hard rock section, and then it works its way back down to a quiet ending. And of course, the ending has the big cymbal splash by Neil Peart there to just reaffirm his new position as drummer in the band. And yeah, I mean, in the end, it's not my favorite on the album, but it's a good album closer. It's definitely a good place for it to be, and it's certainly not a great indicator of where it's to come, but of what's to come. But it still shows them experimenting with timbre and whatnot, and they want the quiet part and the heavy part, and they want to get that contrast and juxtaposition and all that stuff in, which is really cool. And there you go. I think that's just about it for Fly By Night. Again, like I said, pretty significant moment in that is the first album by classic Rush with Geddy, Alex, and Neil. And yeah, it's by no means their best, but for a difficult second album, it's not really a difficult album when you got Neil Peart, but it's really good, and I think it's the best of that really early period prior to 2112. So definitely worthwhile, definitely worth getting if you're a fan of Rush, or if you're just a fan of prog in the 70s. It's not a full-blown prog album. It's a very transitional album, like I said. They're transitioning from the hard rock thing to the heavy prog thing. But yeah, it's a good album. Anyway, stay tuned for more Rush videos. I'll be talking about Caress of Steel next. So if you enjoyed this, like and subscribe, and you will see me in the future for more Rush chats. Take care.